Hello and welcome to Gambling with an Edge. In today's episode number 7, we're going to take a look at poker betting pot odds. For poker seems to be the most popular skill-based gambling game that there is. There are more people who profit from this game, and there's most likely more people who lose from this game when comparing to other games like sports betting, stock trading, blackjack, and well, any other game where you could have an edge. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at pot odds for calling bets on the final street. This is your basic normal pot odds. It's not really betting, but it's from other bets, as well as calling bets with implied odds, whether it be on the flop or the turn. Standard betting pot odds, something that you don't hear too much about, but it's very, very important. As well as when you go all in, what are the betting pot odds within that? So without further ado, let's get started within the first one, which is calling bets on the final straight, basic pot odds. And it's always important to give yourself an edge when understanding pot odds. If you were offered 2-1 on a situation where you win 30% of the time, it's a bad spot. If you will win 40% of the time, it is a good spot. Generally, you want to make sure the odds are significantly in your favor. There are 3 variables in this situation that are important. 1 is the size of the pot, 2, the size of the bet, and the probability odds that you will win. So let's take an example. Let's assume the size of the pot has 1,000 chips and you're faced with a bet of 600. With the risk reward, you have a pot now that's 1,600 when you add the 2 together, and it's costing you 600 to call, so that is your risk. Winning 6 and losing 16 of these situations over the long term is break even, which gives you a percentage of 27 and 1/5%. So when you're looking at this analysis, you need to make sure that you are significantly greater than this in probability to make the call. And when calculating probability odds on the fly when playing, it takes experience, knowledge of the situation to get accurate probability. Understanding opponent hand ranges and what they do in certain situations will greatly improve your analysis on calculating probability odds. Now let's talk about this with implied odds. Oftentimes you have draws to hit hands like flushes, straights, 2-pair trips, and the chances they hit are outs divided by cards left. On the flop, you know you have at least 5 cards that are dead, which is 3 to the flop, 2 to your hand, and thus X over 47 as a basis, or a little over 2% on each out. Assume you have a hand like 7-8 suited and the board brings a 4-5 and a king and you have a flush draw. You have 9 outs to hit a flush and another 3 sixes to hit a straight. 12 over 47 is easy to calculate in your head as it's pretty close to 1/4 or 25% in getting there. This requires you to get greater than 4 times back on your call to ensure a profit. Other things to consider when making this call is, will my opponent fold if I hit my hand? You can think, okay, I got 8-1 implied odds. I got a 3-1 shot of hitting or 4-1 shot. You hit your card. He checks. You bet. He folds. You really didn't get your odds. But are there any cards that can give you profitable bluffing situations? Thus, you have more outs. Maybe an ace or a jack or a king coming up was a big scare card. Maybe you know that you might be scared of hitting a flush and you have a profitable bluffing situation if a particular card comes. Things to look at before you decide you want to make the call. Is hitting a pair out good enough to check or call for showdown? Maybe you figure they're very big at bluffing, and if you hit your pair, you can call off their bluff. Of course, it's very important to know your opponent when making this decision. As far as standard betting pot odds, assume you're playing a cash game. The stakes are $1, $2. It is folded to you on the button, and you make a raise to $6. What is your betting pot odds? Well, the answer, your risk is $6 because that's what you're betting. Your reward is 3 because you're getting the small blind and the big blind. So this is 1 and 2 odds, and if your opponent folds 2/3 the time, then you break even. Your 2 wins will give you +6, and your 1 loss will give you -6. Now, in times when your opponents call the bet, then you are still in the game or the hand with chips in the pot. Ignore the fact that you have committed chips. Rather, you just had a loss in your pre-flop raise attempt. If any situations happen to occur from this point on that is profitable, take it. This way, if you did take the pot 2/3 of the time pre-flop, you can have huge edges with your raises pre-flop. Therefore, you can say, okay, I've had maybe even 60% of the time those raises work. So there you lose a little bit, but from that point on, maybe you have enough of a profit where it's overall a good play. Now let's talk about the fun one, betting all in pot odds. Going all in can be very exciting, scary, and profitable to do. The Russian having tournament lives on the line or full cash game stacks on the line brings interesting situation. Being faced with the decision for all your chips can be very intimidating to opponents, which is why you may want to consider this as your play when the situation presents itself. Two aspects are worth calculating when determining if all in is the correct play. One, betting pot odds, which has already been covered. And two, the showdown percentage you should expect on the long-term time frame. Your showdown percentage is simply the percentage of time your holding will win if you are placed in the showdown. If you have pocket aces and you are moving your hand pre-flop, you should win greater than 80%, for aces are that percent to defeat lower pocket pairs from 2 to kings, and much higher versus hands that have 1 ace or even 1 king. You are much lower against suited connectors like 8-7, but they won't call too often. Maybe on the flop you have an ace-3 suited and you flop a flush draw. If called here, you are only beating other flush draws. You have minimum 8 immediate outs on the flush, sometimes 9, and at times you will have 3 outs to hit an ace. If I move a flush draw on the flop, then I approximate my chances at 33% with 1 ace. You're going to be up against sets that will reduce that percentage greatly. You will have hands that have top pair with an ace and your ace is no good. And there'll be situations where they'll have pairs of queens and kings, and you will have the 12 outs. 38% with an ace and an over, which means like ace-king. Sometimes you'll have not only the ace card to hit, but the king. And in situations where you say you do have ace-king, the highest card on the board is a 10. If he has ace-10, well, you have your flush and a king out. And then if you have 2 overs that are not an ace, I predict it to be 35%. You can get crushed against flush draws, and of course, a pair of aces as well. So let's assume you're on the flop with ace-king suited, and the flop brings jack, 2, and an 8, and you have a flush draw with 2 opponents. Your stack size is 20,000 chips, and the current pot is 3,000. You check first, and the next player bets 2,000 with a higher stack behind, and the other player folds. So now that we know this, we can take the betting odds here, which is 20,000 to win 5,000, or plus 5,000 per time your opponent folds. Because the pot was 3, your opponent bet 2, your pot's 5. Your showdown percentage is about 38% because when they get called, we're going to be beaten many times against hands like a set of 2, set of 8, set of jacks, pocket queens, pocket kings, ace, jack, hands of that nature. The final stat that is needed is the percentage of time your opponent is required to fold to break even on this betting prop. So therefore, calculating the plus minus on showdown at 38% shot of winning, your risk is 20,000 and you're going to win 23,000. Wins will bring you plus 23,000 and losses are negative 20,000. So in 100 situations, you should win 38 times. So you multiply that by 23,000 for plus 874K. And on 62 losses, you should lose 1.2 million. So over 100 total situations, that's a loss of 366,000 chips, or per situation, 3,660. So per call, we're going to lose 3,660. Per fold, we're going to gain 5,000. So if your opponents fold 50% of the time, that would be profitable for a gain of 1,340 over 2 situations, or plus 670 per situation. To find the fold break-even percentage, we take the net yield of 36.60 divided by the sum of both of these. If our opponents fold 42.26% of the time, it'll be breaking even. Therefore, if you're in this situation, you need to ask yourself, will my opponent fold much greater than this percentage? Is my percentage high enough over that of calling with the flush draw? Because you could say, well, I have a small edge, but maybe you have a bigger edge by just flat calling. And when you're looking over this, it's probably recommended to use software to determine this, create a spreadsheet, sort of like doing your research in the lab before you play the game. Look at different situations. Well, if the pot's this much, the bet is this much, how often do I need to have a fold then? So that when you're at the table, you can be familiar with almost every situation that comes your way. Of course, this comes with experience and more laboratory pre-play work. So thank you for tuning in. Now, next week, I'm going to discuss tournament odds, which is something I created or thought of about 10 years ago, which has to do with tournaments and situations where you have your tournament life on the line, or even a decent amount of chips in your on the line. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for tuning in, and good luck at the tables. Bye-bye.